Okay, hello everybody. This is Mr. P, and we are going to go over some Pearson correlation coefficients. All right. So this, I believe, is chapter 2, and we already talked about the Spearman rank correlation coefficient. So now we're going to talk about the Pearson. So with the Pearson, we're going to be using actual data. We're not going to be looking at ranked data or score ranks. We're actually going to be looking at raw data. So this is data that's reported in the interval or ratio scales rather than the ordinal scale. And it is more precise than the Spearman rank because, again, we're using actual scores. We're not using score ranks. We're not using ordinal data. So the Pearson is used a lot more commonly than the actual Spearman. So we're going to talk about this one, and we're actually going to do a couple practice problems so you guys know how to calculate your R values, how to determine whether or not it's statistically significant, and then eventually we're going to show you how to graph some of these using Excel. So we are going to be using Excel to solve some of these problems. You don't have to have Excel, but having Excel is going to make these problems much easier to complete. So the symbol used for the Pearson is going to be the small letter R. Okay, so you're going to notice that you're going to see this R symbol showing up quite a bit. So that is what we're going to be looking for. Okay, this little guy right there. So that's going to be our Pearson correlation coefficient. Okay, pretty simple to understand. And then that R value is going to be a number between -1 and +1. Remember, it's going to be a value between those two. So if you get an R value of some crazy high number like 6.2, you know you did something wrong. You have to go back and double check your work. So again, your R value is always going to be between a -1 and a +1, right? So to do this, especially using Excel, or if you're going to do this with a piece of paper, the easiest way is to go ahead and create some columns. So you're going to create 5 columns and you're going to label them X. So that's your first data set, X squared, and of course Y is the second data set that you're going to be comparing with X. So you have X, you have your X squared column, you have a Y column, you have a Y squared column, and then of course you're going to have an X times Y column. So make sure you work carefully and work neat. It's easy to make mistakes if you're not working carefully. So again, I recommend that you do this in Excel, or again, if you're doing this on a piece of paper, that you just work very carefully. All right, so we're going to put the respective scores in either the X or the Y columns. And then you're going to be summing the scores. So you're going to be summing all of the X scores. You're going to be summing all of the Y scores. And then, of course, we're going to be squaring these also. So we're going to be finding the sum of the squares for the X and the Y. And you'll see this once we pull up the Excel spreadsheet. It'll make a lot more sense when we actually pull up the spreadsheet. Okay, you're also going to be multiplying your X and your Y scores together, and you're going to be filling in your X times Y column. So there's going to be a lot of multiplication going on, a lot of squaring, a lot of adding, but you're just going to work carefully and put these values in the correct column to be able to plug these values into the formula if you are doing it by hand. Now, if you're using Excel, and you don't have to do this by hand, then it's just as simple as using the correct function to solve for your R value. And we will show you how to do that also. All right, so we'll show you an example of what this spreadsheet's going to look like once you get it all set up. Okay, so here's an example of an Excel spreadsheet with some data in it. So in this example, we're looking at a correlation between a person's body weight in pounds. Okay, over here in this first column, these are our X values, and we're correlating that with a person's VO2 max over here in the Y column. So we have our X values and we have our Y values. And here you can see the other columns that we need to add. So here's X's, here's our Y values. This column is going to be our X times Y values. Over here is going to be our X values squared. And then this last column is going to be our Y values squared. Okay, so you're just going to be filling in these columns with the appropriate score once you go ahead and complete this operation. So for this first column using Excel, what we're going to do is we're going to go ahead and click the empty cell. We're going to enter an equal sign. Okay, we're going to tell Excel that we're creating a formula or an equation, and we're just going to go ahead and select our first X score, which is 220 pounds. Okay, and we're going to go ahead and times that. Okay, we're going to times that by our Y score right here, which is a VO2 max of 35. And we're going to put that in there. All right, so it's that simple. We're just multiplying these two values together. All right, and then over here, of course, in Excel, you can just grab this drag handle and you could drag this down and it will fill in all of that data. So you don't have to do each one by hand. All right, let's go over to the next column. So the next column is our X score squared. So again, we're going to start with an equal sign. We're going to go ahead and select our first X value, which is 220 pounds. And we're going to raise that. We're going to raise that to the second power. So remember that caret right here, this caret, that is the symbol for raising to a power. So we're going to raise 220 pounds to the second power. And we're going to enter that. Okay, and that's our value. And again, we're just going to grab this drag handle and we're just going to drag this down and we're going to square all of our X values. Okay, very good. So there they are. Let's do the same thing with our Y values. So we're going to go ahead and equals. We're going to select our Y value. We're going to raise that to the second power. We're going to enter that in. And then, of course, we're going to drag that and fill in all of our Y squared data. All right, very good. Let's keep going. All right, now the reason we're doing this is if we had to do this by hand, these values that we're going to be calculating are what you would plug into the actual formula. All right, this is the correlation coefficient formula if you had to do it by hand. So we are calculating all of the values that you would plug into this formula. All right, if we go down here, and of course is the number of paired scores that we have. So if we take a look, you can see we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have 10 students. And a quicker way to do this, of course, is to use the function count. So let's go to formulas. Let's insert a function. We're going to look for count. I don't see it. So let's see if we can type it in right here and hit go. And there it is, count. We're going to go ahead and select that. And we're just going to go ahead and select all of our X data and put it in there. And that's going to give us a count of 10. We have 10 individuals. All right, now next we're going to summate all of our X scores. We're going to put them right here in this box. So we're going to use the auto sum feature. And we're going to select all of our X scores. And we're going to put them in there. Very good. Let's do the same thing with our Y scores. So we're going to sum all of the Y scores. Very good. All right, next is we're going to summate the X times Y scores. So all of these, we're going to put those right here in this cell. All right, so we're going to click this cell. We're going to go auto sum. And of course, we'll select all those values and put them in there. And we'll do the same thing for the summation of the X squared scores and the summation of the Y squared scores. All right, so let's go ahead and click that empty cell. Let's hit auto sum and select all of these values. Very good. And do the same thing for the Y squared. We're going to hit auto sum. Make sure we select all of our values and we're going to insert those in. Okay, so we've got the values that we're going to be plugging into this formula, except for we do need the sum of the X scores squared, the sum of the Y scores squared. And this is going to be a different value than you get for these two. Do not confuse these two values for these two values. They are actually asking you for something different. All right, this is asking you to take the X scores and square them first and then summate them. This is asking you to take all of the X scores, add them up, and then square it. So really, it has to do with order of operations. What are you doing first? Are you squaring it first or are you adding it up first? All right, so let's go ahead and complete these two empty cells right here. So this cell is asking me to take the summation of the X scores, which is right here, and square it. So that's what we're going to do. So we're going to click this empty cell. Right, we're going to go ahead and start with our equal sign. We're going to click the value we have in this cell, which is the summation of the x scores, and we're going to raise that to the second power. And we're going to put it into our sheet. Ooh, that's a big value. Look at that, over 3 million. All right, over here, we're going to do the same thing with our y-scores. So we're going to take the summation of our y-scores, which is right here, 406, and we're going to square that. So let's click this empty cell. We're going to hit equals. Right, we're going to go ahead and select 406, and we're going to raise that to the second power and put it in there. Okay, so what you see here, all these values in pink that you see, all right, these right here, all these values, these are the values that you would be plugging into this formula if you were going to calculate your R value by hand. Now, again, if you have Excel, you won't need to do that. If you have Excel, we're just going to go ahead and use the Excel function to calculate our R value. But again, you could double check your work if you needed to. All right, if you wanted to do it by hand for whatever reason, you have the actual values now that you would plug into this formula.